All right, a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining today's session. Today, we're going to learn about what is exactly the AWS Global Infrastructure. So, we have seen a few sessions where we have learned about AWS, what are the different types of resources we can create in AWS, so on and so forth. Today, we're going to understand how did AWS come up, what was the starting point for the evolution of AWS. So if you see, AWS, as the name suggests, stands for Amazon Web Services, and it is part of the well-known Amazon e-commerce um, brand. And Amazon Web Services is one of their domains, business domains, which contributes a very huge, significant amount to their overall revenue. So we know Amazon as one of the e-commerce giants, and when they started off, they had their own infrastructure, they had their own servers, data centers, etc. Right? And from what we know about the history, they had a lot of server capacity and other resources capacity, which was extra. So they came up with a business plan where they would rent out that extra compute storage capacity to others who wanted to use it, right? And that's how they started with the Amazon Web Service concept. They started renting out the service, and slowly and steadily they started increasing the number of services as well. So they started off with the service called as S3, which is simple storage service. And from there they evolved into many other services that we now know as the entire Amazon Web Services experience. So that is how they started, and now they have built their entire infrastructure globally in such a way that we can utilize these services from any part of the globe, right? And we know that it is available in many locations. So how does this entire infrastructure work? How is it possible that when I am creating a server somewhere, a virtual machine is created, and then within a few minutes I am able to access it from wherever I am located, right? So how is this entire process working? Like we had seen in the previous video on how we can create an EC2 server. We know that from here on the console through internet, we are filling up a set of instructions, we are filling up a set of specifications that we require, and then using that specifications, Amazon is able to spin up a virtual machine for us in one of their data centers, right? So when that is happening, what exactly is going on in the background, that within a very short period we are able to create several resources in terms of the network, in terms of the storage, in terms of compute power. How is all that happening? That's what we are going to understand. So to make all this happen, AWS has its infrastructure spread out globally, right? So they have their network, they have their own data centers all over the globe. So in the data center session, we had seen how the entire AWS infrastructure came up to be, right? Earlier we had everything on premises, physical hardware, but now everything is virtual that we use on the AWS end, right? So how did that come up? What was the kind of equipment and the data center hardware, etc., that we used to use earlier, right? So all that we had seen. So in this session we will see exactly how is AWS providing this service to us. Before that, we need to understand why is AWS one of the leading cloud providers as well, right? Because if you now see, there are many major players like Azure, from Microsoft, we have Google Cloud, we have Oracle Cloud, we have many other players like Alibaba and all that. But AWS has been one of the pioneers, and then now, even now, they have a very large hold in the cloud market. One of the reasons for that is they were pioneers. They were the ones who started it initially, right? And now also we have many big players, and almost everyone has a very good hold in the cloud market, and that's good. The more the players we have, the more options we have as customers, the more number of services and flexibility we have in terms of what resources and what tools we want to choose to make our requirements come to pass, right? So that's the advantage as a customer we have. Now, we will understand what is exactly the global infrastructure of AWS. So if you see in this diagram that I have, this is from Amazon's own website, and I'm on a page where they describe their global infrastructure. So if you see, this page is called as AWS Global Infrastructure. It says the most secure, extensive and reliable global cloud infrastructure for your applications. And here is where we can create an account, and how to create an account, what are the details that you require, or what are the limits for a free tier. All that I've explained in another video, which I'll link here. You can check that out. So in this page, if you see, it says AWS Global Infrastructure, and they have mentioned a few things here. So let's try and understand what that is and how it relates with the resources that we create. So if you, in this case, if you see, it says 36 launched regions, and it says each with multiple availability zones. So these are the terms that we need to understand a lot. If you have seen the video where I have explained the entire process of how to create a virtual machine, you'll see that in the network section I had mentioned that we will understand how to create a network of your own, how to create a virtual private cloud, etc. Right? So that is what relates here. You will see that here AWS has several regions, it has several availability zones. So these are the terms that we need to understand very well, because these terms are used a lot in the day-to-day discussions when you're working in the cloud environment, and also if you're appearing for any certifications or something, even in the questions and all, these are very common terms. And if you want to become an architect or an engineer working on the AWS infrastructure, you will need to know these terms. So make sure you understand all of these terms very well, because when you use all these terms together, there is a possibility that there will be a lot of confusion. So we need to understand these terms really, really well. So first we see what is a region, then we understand that there are multiple availability zones. So if you see here, there are 114 availability zones, and there are something called as 700 plus CloudFront POPs, which is point of presence. So we'll understand that as well. Okay, so now if you come down, it says AWS Global Infrastructure Map, and it says the AWS cloud spans across 114 availability zones with 36 geographic regions. And there are plans for more availability zones and more regions being added as well. Okay, so let's try and understand now what this is. So if you see, this is the world map, and if you see, there are many green dots here. The continents are separated, and there are many green dots as well as there are many red dots. Okay, so if you see, there is a legend given here. It says the green ones are regions and the red ones are the ones which are coming soon. So what that means is, the green ones are the regions which have already been established, which are already working, they are already in production, as we say, and the red ones are the ones which are coming up soon. So if I take up the example of United States, if I point to North America, you'll see that in the United States and Canada as well, there are several green dots here. Okay, so if I point to any one of them, for example, I point to this in North America, we have Mexico. So it says availability zones 3, right? And if I point to something else like Ohio, it says launched 2016 and availability zones 3. Okay, now what are these? So you have the different continents. In these continents, you have the AWS separation called as regions. So what is a region? A region is a geographical location where you have multiple AWS data centers. Okay, so if you see, a data center looks something like this. You'll have racks and racks of different types of equipment, like servers, and you'll have several routing devices, you'll have several switches. So these all these network and compute devices, everything put together creates a data center. So in AWS infrastructure also, you will have these kind of data centers. Okay, so if I point to any one of the green green dots, you'll see it gives me the name of the region. So what is a region? A region is nothing but a geographical location where AWS has its presence. And when I say AWS has its presence, it means AWS has its data centers. So you'll see that not in every country AWS is present. Okay, so in every country AWS may not be present, but at the same time, wherever they are present, they are accessible from almost every part of the globe through the internet. Okay, so the basic idea behind that is you need to access any region where a data center is located closest to you. Okay, so if you have a particular data center or a region in the country where you are located, that's very good, you can connect to that. But if it is not located in the country where you are present, you can choose any one which is closest to you. You can even choose the ones which are a little further away from you, but we will discuss later on how exactly to choose the particular data center or availability zone which is best for you. So what is a data center, what is the availability zone, what is a region, we'll understand all that in detail. But the major reason is that you have all these different regions is so that you can have availability throughout the globe, right? Through, that's why it's called as a global infrastructure. The infrastructure is spread throughout the globe, irrespective of where you are located. You can access a particular region and then use the services that AWS provides. Okay, so now let's get into a few more details. So if you see, if I select this Europe and Africa region, and this one is called as APAC, Asia Pacific. So if I select this region, right? So let's say I select this dot, it says Europe, Stockholm, launched 2018, right? So it means that this particular region was launched in 2018. And when I say this region, what does it mean? It means that AWS launched its data centers in Stockholm, which is in Sweden, in Europe, in 2018. Now, when we say AWS launched its services, what we really mean is they built their data centers in that region in 2018. Okay, now how do we know what is a data center? So if you see here, it mentions something called as availability zone. Okay, so what is an availability zone? An availability zone is nothing but a data center. Okay, so the all the data centers that we saw, you have, from what we see here, it means that in Stockholm in Sweden, AWS has 3 data centers. So when we say data centers, you can say an availability zone is comparable to a data center. Now, why do we need 3 in Stockholm itself? Just to make sure that we have availability. Okay, so that's one of the reasons that the data center itself in AWS is also called as availability zone, because it makes sure that the services that AWS is providing is always available. So the services are running from multiple data centers. The reason is, even if one data center fails, the other data center will be present to make sure that the service is available to the users. And just to make sure that there will be no situation where none of the data centers are available, you have 3 in place. In certain cases, you will have only 2 availability zones, but most of the cases you'll see that there will be 3 availability zones for sure. So when we say 3 availability zones, what does it mean? It means there are 3 data centers. Now, when it comes to data centers, the data centers are always separated by a distance. If you see here, let's say that you have one data center here. So we are talking about the region of Stockholm. So I have one, let's say that this is my one data center, this is the other data center I have, and this is the third data center I have. Okay, now all these data centers are in Stockholm, Sweden. Okay, so this is my Stockholm, is the geographical location, which is also called as the region. Okay, so Stockholm is my region, and in this region I have my data centers, which are also called as availability zones. Okay, why are they called availability zones? Because they ensure that the services that AWS is providing is always available, even if one or two data centers go down or they become unavailable, whatever be the reason. Maybe there is a natural calamity, maybe there is a power issue, or whatever it is, right? So I can say that this is my data center. Okay, so this is my availability zone number 1. Okay, and then here I have number 2, here I have number 3. Okay, so these are the three data centers we have, or the availability zones that we have. Now, guys, whenever a data center is built, or whenever a data center is made available, there is a lot of planning that goes on in the background. For example, most important thing that we need to make sure is there is that the region where we are building a particular data center or availability zone, there should be minimal amount of natural calamities. So for example, you'll see wherever there are data centers, there will be minimum amount of um, hurricanes or tornadoes or flooding or major rain, right? So these kind of things are always a risk factor for a data center. If there is a lot of tornadoes or earthquakes or wildfires, in these kind of cases, a data center is not safe, right? So they always plan it in such a way that they choose a physical geographical location where in the last 50, 60, 70 years there has been no history of any major natural calamities, and that makes sure that your data is safe, your data center is safe, it's always available for users, right? And that too, even in a when we say that it's available in a particular region, let's say that it's in Stockholm, or maybe some region like Northern Virginia in US, or maybe in Sydney, Australia, whatever be the region, when we give the region a name, it doesn't mean that it is within the boundary of a particular city alone, right? It could be in and around that region, because they always make sure that there is a significant distance between two data centers, right? So if I have two different data centers in the same region within, let's say, around 2 to 5 miles or 10 miles, then if there is a natural calamity, even in the worst case scenario, it would affect both the data centers, right? So then that serves no purpose. So we are making sure that we have multiple data centers only to ensure that if there is a calamity, if there is any issue that one data center faces, the others will still be available to provide the service. So in this case, if you see, we will make sure that these data centers are, let's say, a safe distance. So let's say they are at least let's say around 100 miles apart, in and around that particular city, to ensure that even if one data center has any issue going on, it will not, the same issue will not impact the other data center. So these data centers, also called as availability zones, are always in sync with each other as well. So here onwards, we will always mention them as availability zones, because these are the terms that AWS wants us to use in our day-to-day conversation, in terms of architecting, in terms of working on our daily operations, even in terms of our exams. These are the terms that we'll use. So we won't be using the term data center anymore. We'll understand that an availability zone is the closest match for a data center. So now, if you see here in this case, we have multiple availability zones, and all these availability zones have their own source of power, independent from others. So even if one data center or availability zone has failure in power, the others will continue to run. And there are multiple sources of power. Let's say one will be through the regular electricity, and then there will be certain UPS systems which will be in place as a backup power. There will be some other systems in place, diesel generators or something. Even in case of a natural calamity, when the entire availability zone goes down, there is no power at all. Even then, using different types of power sources like diesel generators and all, you can keep the entire data center running continuously for several days, right? So those are the kind of features which are available. Not just that, all these availability zones are also interconnected with each other through AWS high speed network. Okay, so all these data centers or availability zones are also connected with each other through AWS high speed network. So this is not the regular internet that you have. This is AWS's own interconnection between the different availability zones in that region. And in the same way, even though you have these different the different availability zones within the region interconnected with each other, you also have multiple regions like this, which are interconnected with each other completely in terms of the regions itself. So let's say that this is my region 1 and this is my region 2. So let's say that this is somewhere over This is somewhere in Sydney, Australia or something. So let's say we have two different regions. So these two regions will also be interconnected to each other through high speed AWS networks. So if you see, this is the entire setup, that is the global infrastructure of AWS that we have seen. So what is the advantage? You have multiple availability zones in each region which are interconnected with each other, and then you have different regions all over the globe which are again interconnected with each other through the AWS high speed network. So this gives you a lot of different types of advantage, which makes AWS a very viable solution when you're looking to deploy your resources on the cloud. Now let's try and understand what is the advantage that we get when we are deploying our resources on the cloud in this global infrastructure manner. So if you see here, what are the core benefits of AWS global infrastructure? So we have seen that you have different regions. In the different regions, you have different availability zones. So how does that look when you're actually working on the console? Um, if I now take you to the AWS console, this is how it looks. We have worked several times on the EC2 console. So if you see at the right side top here, you see a list of regions. So you have all the different regions names, and then you have a certain nomenclature associated with that. So let's say you have Northern Virginia in the United States, you have its nomenclature as US East 1. Similarly, for Mumbai, you have AP South 1. So AP stands for Asia Pacific. Same way you have for Canada as well. For Europe, you have EU Central 1, West 1, West 2, etc. So there are many other regions as well which are at present not enabled for my account. I'm just using these accounts which I have enabled. So you can enable and disable the specific regions that you want to work on. Okay, so this is how you select the regions. Now in the Mumbai region, um, which I have selected at present, if I create a certain resource, that resource will be created only in the specific data centers available in the Mumbai region. If I switch to some other region, those resources will not be visible. So how do we switch the regions? How do we select the different regions? By going to these options at the top right here. So at present, the Mumbai region is highlighted. That's where I am. Now, if I click on EC2 here and I go in here, and if I launch a virtual machine, that virtual machine will be launched in one of the data centers or availability zones in Mumbai, because I have selected the Mumbai region over here. Okay, so once I create a virtual machine here, then if I switch to some other region, let's say I switch to Singapore, in that case, when I come to EC2, I will not be able to see the virtual machine which I have created in Mumbai, because that is running in the Mumbai data center or availability zone. So this is how you select the different regions. So now let's say that I'm selecting a particular region. Let's say at present I'm in Singapore region. Now if I click on launch instance and I go through this entire process of creating a virtual machine, we know that when we come to the network settings, here you can select the particular network related configurations. Okay, so now if I click on edit here, you will see that there is a section called as subnet. Okay, now when I select the drop down here, it shows multiple options. So it shows the different places where I can create the virtual machine. So what are these different places? These are the different availability zones. So if you see here, it says availability zone AP Southeast 1A, AP Southeast 1B, AP Southeast 1C. So these are the availability zones under the AP Southeast region. So what is AP Southeast? See here, AP Southeast 1. This is the Singapore region where we are. So we select the region at the top right, and then under that region you have different availability zones, that is different data centers. And here, when you are actually creating a virtual machine within the region, you can select which exact data center or availability zone you want to deploy that virtual machine in. So if you see here, the AP Southeast 1 is the name of the region, and then the availability zone is named as A, B, and C. So here we have three availability zones, A, B, and C, and then you can choose which particular availability zone you want to deploy your virtual machine in. So if I select A, my virtual machine will be deployed here. Now, why do you have this kind of an option? And that is where the entire importance of availability zones and regions come in. Because if you are deploying, let's say, an application or a website, if you deploy it in only one particular availability zone, in only one data center. So let's say that I had a physical data center where I have my entire e-commerce website running, correct? And for some reason, in that particular location where my physical data center is located, if there is some kind of a tornado or some natural calamity, because of my entire data center goes into a blackout and it's not available at all, then my e-commerce website will go down. It will not be available for customers, right? So what do? We always deploy our website or application in multiple virtual machines or environments in different locations, so that even if one is impacted, the others will continue to serve the customers. So in this case, if you see, you have three different availability zones which are far apart from each other. If you deploy your application or website in all three, or at least in two different data centers, even if one goes down due to any reason, then your application will continue to work from the other data center, right? And if you have three, even if two go down, then your application will continue to work from the third one. So this is the importance of availability zone. And you can go a step further. Let's say you have a very critical application. In that case, you can deploy it across two or three different availability zones in one region, and then you can again deploy it in another availability zone or multiple availability zones in another region altogether. So in that case, even if an entire region and an entire city-wide blackout happens where multiple data centers are affected, which is a very, very rare phenomenon, in that case also, if you have a critical application, it will continue to run from other regions in other availability zones. Okay, so this is the reason you have multiple availability zones, so that you can deploy your virtual machines or your applications, websites, etc. in different data centers. Okay, so you have the region, you have the uh, availability zones. So now, if you see here, one of the core benefits of AWS Global Infrastructure is scalability, that you can increase and decrease the required capacity as per your requirement. So in this same case, just like we have seen how to deploy a server, a virtual machine, you can deploy multiple virtual machines based on your requirement. If the number of users accessing your website or application keeps on increasing, you can keep increasing the number of virtual machines serving those users in different availability zones, and you can load balance. So these are the core benefits. The second core benefit is cost effectiveness. So if you had to deploy your own data center physically, it would have a lot of costs associated with it, right? So major cost would be operational expense, where you are spending a lot of money in operating the services, which is applicable in the case of AWS as well. But another major cost when you're talking about physical infrastructure is also capex, which is capital expenditure. So just to deploy the resources, just to get the data center up and running, you need to invest a lot of cost, which is not at all a case in the AWS scenario. So it becomes a very, very cost effective solution where you are deploying your resources without any considerable capital expenditure. And you also have the pay as you go pricing model, where you are only paying for the resources that you're using for the amount of time that you're using them. And then the third core benefit of AWS infrastructure is also security and compliance. So if you see in this case, you have different regions. So in terms of security and compliance, there would be certain organizations which may have certain critical data, or certain financial institutions, some banking firms, or certain government related institutions, which may have certain compliance and regulations which do not allow them to take the organization's data outside of the geographical boundary of that country. So let's say that you have a country like something like India, where you have a certain financial institution, right? And they have a lot of critical data, customer data, PII data, which according to their compliance regulations, cannot be taken outside of the physical region of India. In that case, what would you do? You would deploy all the resources within the boundary of India. So if you see, within India, you have two different locations, which is Mumbai, and then you have another one, which is Hyderabad, which is at present not enabled on my account. So you can deploy your resources in either one of them. In certain countries, if you do not have AWS availability zone or data center, then they may choose to use a certain region which is closest to them if the organization management allows it, right? So that could be one of the reasons where you select a particular region according to the compliance requirements. There will be other scenarios where you may want to choose a particular region based on the performance requirements. So let's say that there is a particular organization which is operating out of Singapore, right? Now, let's say that they want to deploy their applications. If they deploy their applications in some other region, like maybe Australia, Sydney, Australia, right? And they are accessing it from Singapore. Then, because of the distance, geographical distance, it may go through several hops before reaching the actual users. In that case, over a period of time, there will be a lot of latency, and the overall user experience will not be that good. So, if they are located in Singapore and they do have the AWS data centers in Singapore itself, the best decision would be that they deploy their resources in the Singapore data center itself. Or if there are certain countries where they do not have the AWS data center, they can choose the region which is closest to them so that the latency or the delay in accessing those resources is minimal. Okay, so that is another reason why you would choose which particular region you want to select. Now, another reason would be, let's say that you are located in Singapore, but the customers for whom you are deploying the application or the website, they are located in United States. In that case, it would be only wise that you deploy the resources in United States, even though you are located in Singapore. Okay, so let's say you are located in Singapore, you're deploying it for your users in the United States. Of course, then you will deploy the resources while sitting in Singapore itself. You choose one of the data centers in United States, Ohio or something, and then because the users are going to be accessing it from US itself, for them it will be a very good performance because they are accessing it within their close geographical region itself, so that they'll get a good performance. So these are certain conditions that you keep in mind when you're choosing a specific region and the availability zones in which you are going to create the resources. So these are the core benefits that from any location globally you can create your resources in any given AWS region. And then these availability zones and these regions, the main advantage that they offer is they help your applications and websites to be highly available. So what does highly available mean? No matter what challenges come in terms of the data centers operations, even if certain data center goes down, or if there's some power blackout or something like that, even in that case, your applications are available through the other regions and other availability zones. So that's why you always deploy your resources, or you always deploy your applications in multiple availability zones. Even if one fails, it is available through the other. So highly available and highly reliable, these are some of the core benefits that AWS Global Infrastructure offers. And also it allows you to auto scale. It also allows you to load balance. So we will see this in detail in other videos, how to balance the load between the different virtual machines that you have, how to auto scale. That means if the resource capacity needs to be increased in terms of when the users are accessing the application and the load is increasing on the application infrastructure, then how do you increase it? How do you increase the compute capacity? How do you increase the database capacity? And then you decrease it when the load goes down. How do you do all that? That is called as auto scaling. So how do you manage auto scaling? How do you manage load balancing? All that we'll see in the coming videos. But yes, all these are part of the core benefits of AWS Global Infrastructure. So this entire infrastructure allows us to manage our applications in such a way that we can keep it highly available, so that and we can deploy it all across the globe, so that from anywhere our users can access it in. So this was a complete understanding of the AWS global infrastructure. AWS has its data centers all over the world, and they are all interconnected through AWS's own high-speed network, and it allows us to deploy our applications and our websites globally and make it available to our customers at very low latency. Okay, so I hope you had a good session and understanding about AWS global infrastructure. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.